to this place called Kunlun, a place in which she did not believe, and which she thus could never hope to enter. No longer do you feel the pain. Now you are merely Iron Fist, and you are as well a man gone berserk. Today on the Comic Book Report, Iron Fist, Danny Rand, The Early Years Omnibus. Stick around and check it out. Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I'm back with another Marvel Omnibus review. This time we're looking at the origins of Danny Rand's Iron Fist. And while I can't wait to dive into this Bronze Age classic from Marvel Comics, I do want to just shout out and say thank you to our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link for it in this video's description, and if you see something you like, you can even use my discount code at checkout, The Comic Book Report, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support this channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's get started with today's Omnibus review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written primarily by Chris Claremont, Doug Monk, and Tony Isabella, and illustrated primarily by John Byrne and Rudy Nebres, amongst others. The comics in this volume were published by Marvel Comics beginning in 1974. The volume itself collects Marvel Premiere issues 15 through 25, Iron Fist issues 1 through 15, Marvel Team Up issues 63 and 64, and materials from The Deadly Hands of Kung Fu issue 10, 18 through 24, 29, 31 through 33, and Special Issue 1, along with Bizarre Adventures Issue 25. This is an oversized hardcover edition with nice glossy print paper stock, a sewn binding, and a total of 952 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. And while I won't be showing anything of a graphic nature per se, this does have a parental advisory warning, as this collection does include some partial nudity and moments of violence. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that Iron Fist Omnibus from Marvel Comics. Yes, this is Danny Rand, The Early Years Omnibus. This is a collection I've been hoping that they would solicit ever since I read the Luke Cage Omnibus not too long ago. I am still fingers crossed hoping for a Power Man and Iron Fist Omnibus where these two heroes collide, but until then I was really excited to get my hands on this Bronze Age classic. As far as the dust jacket design and the whole book layout and formatting, it's very comparable to what you'd expect from any Silver or Bronze Age Marvel Omnibus. I should say I do have the standard cover for this omnibus. There was also a direct market cover available. I'll try to get a thumbnail of that so you can compare. But overall, I really like the look of this omnibus. On the back of that dust jacket as well, you have all the thumbnails of the issues presented, some information about the book, along with that mature content warning, the kind of parental advisory that I mentioned earlier. Overall, a very nice, crisp, clean look. I love seeing all the issues thumbnailed. Really, really good stuff here. And as we finish our look at the back of that dust jacket, I did want to spend a minute just doing one final look at the overall dust jacket one last time. This time I will be showing you the interior flaps as well, giving you everything spread out at a glance. Granted, for these Silver and Bronze Age omnibuses, it's not as remarkable when I do these spreads. Sometimes with more modern omnibuses, there'll be wraparounds or kind of more art kind of situated here. But I still like what we get. I want to give a kind of bird's eye view of everything as well for prospective collectors out there. After looking at the dust jacket, we will go ahead and begin to transition to the Under the Dust Jacket hardback book itself and the art we have printed on there. I say art, but again, with these books, you're going to really have kind of the title, maybe a logo, usually the spine is reproduced, and that's really what we have here. And honestly, I have no real complaints. I do think the Under the Dust Jacket hardback book is quite sharp, especially for a Bronze Age omnibus, and I'm a huge sucker for that awesome kind of dragon logo we have on the back of the book. Really crisp, good looking collection from Marvel. And now I'll go ahead and do one final spread, this time showing you the Under the Dust Jacket hardback book. Again, just at a glance for all prospective collectors out there. Really crisp book, like it a lot. And now we'll go ahead and transition to the binding. Okay, and again for this omnibus, it appears to be a sewn binding, and I will say this was a really well-bound book. I had no real issues with it. We're still predominantly in an era where we have a margin around a lot of the panels, so we don't have a lot of gutter loss in this collection, at least not in my experience. You'll see as I flip through though, and you can make your own determinations, but I really found the binding to be quite delightful. Yeah, my copy laid open pretty flat. Granted, I am filming this after reading it all the way through. And now with that done, let's go ahead and jump into the book proper. And as we make our way in, we have, your title page, your bibliography publication information. We have a great kind of layout of all the creators and everyone involved in that. And then we have a full-on numbered, titled table of contents. Really love seeing this. I think that this is great for collectors out there, especially when we have these older school comics that have the margins. Page numbers are much more prevalent, and so they're able to index and map them so well. I love having a good table of contents. This book also has some great forewords, introductions at a couple points throughout this omnibus. We also have the letters pages included where applicable. My secret is I always kind of skim the letter pages, but they're honestly a fantastic time capsule of the era, and it's really fun to see who was writing in, what they were writing in about, and kind of the humor we get from a lot of the creators. At any rate, the book starts off with that Marvel premiere issue, and we're jumping right into the origins of the Iron Fist. Something I will say, I have not read a large amount of Iron Fist comics. I've seen him show up in crossovers, maybe in team books. Culturally, I'm aware of Iron Fist. As a fan of the Marvel Universe, I am a fan of Iron Fist. But for some reason, I kind of got a bug to dive more into this character. After reading the Luke Cage Omnibus I mentioned last year, I was aware they have a team book, and I hope to get to that someday, but I wanted to read some of the original Iron Fist content. So I was elated when I found out this omnibus was coming from Marvel, and it did not disappoint. I should say, while I read this, I was also reading the Immortal Iron Fist series by Ed Brubaker, Matt Fraction, and team. They released that omnibus with expanded content, the Immortal Weapons stuff kind of recently. Anyway, I've been reading both of these omnibuses in tandem. I obviously have finished this one now, still making my way through the other one, but it was really fun to read both of these side by side, kind of original Danny Rand Iron Fist stuff and a much more modern run. Really fun stuff. I was also watching the first season of that Netflix series that was about Iron Fist. So I just had a very Iron Fist filled, let's call it February. Anyway, really great. This was my first book I was able to finish for Iron Fist, though, so that's what's getting the review. Jumping into the actual content, though, we start with a great origin story, and in many ways it kind of starts in media res. What I mean by that is we have kind of a present-day story with the Iron Fist, and we have intermittent flashbacks throughout that kind of treat us to a lot of that origin story and what's even going on here. For those that don't know, Danny Rand is kind of just a regular boy. He's a New Yorker for all intents and purposes. He had a loving mother and father. His father was a really interesting man who had a lot of kind of secret interests, especially having to do with Kunlun, this kind of fabled martial arts village in this kind of monastic area in the Himalayas or some mountain range. But anyway, he was also a big businessman, something like that, it feels like. And he went with his friends and his business partner to try to hunt down this mythical city. And on his way, they basically get betrayed by his business partner. His father falls to his death. His mother is attacked by wolves trying to save his life. And he's eventually found and brought into this city of Kunlun, where he's raised by basically like ninja monks. We find out that Kunlun is a city that only interacts with our plane of existence every like 10 years. So Danny gets taken to this realm, and he's there for 10 years where he has his kind of coming of age. His entire adolescence from maybe ages 10-ish through adulthood here are all in Kunlun, and he's been trained to be this immortal weapon. Part of his training was he was trying to get the tools he needed. They kind of hoped he would get the tools to deal with the grief of losing his parents. For him, it was just honing himself himself as a weapon to ultimately get revenge on his father's old business partner. But at one point in the training, you kind of have this feeling that there was still more for him to learn, and so he kind of opted to try for this big thing where this chosen one would basically fight a dragon and kind of dip their hands in the heart of this dragon if they were able to conquer, and they would get the power of the Iron Fist where they can kind of focus their energies and their essences into their fists so they become like unto a thing of iron. Anyway, he was able to, of course, do this and become the Immortal Iron Fist. He was the first real outworlder, at least at this point in the continuity, to gain this ability, not like a native son of Kunlun. And with that, he's able to go back to the regular world, go back to New York to try to, enact his vengeance after 10 years when he's, able to get back to Earth. And that's basically the origin for this character. Danny Rand is, of course, the titular Iron Fist, and the kind of villainous business partner is someone named Meacham, and he basically, the first arc of this is him trying to get to him, who's now this really successful kind of billionaire business magnate kind of guy, and he's trying, again, to get his vengeance. What's really cool about this whole Iron Fist run, and this is something I had no idea about until I picked up this collection, is the narration is in the second person tense. What does that mean? For first person, it's like, I did this, then I went over here. Third person is like, then Danny did this, or then he did this. Second person, though, is you, which is a really, really interesting kind of literary device and tense and way to do something. So the narration we get in the little kind of rectangular boxes is like, then you went into here, and then you tried to attack your enemy, or then you tried to summon the Iron Fist. And it's weird because you, the person I'm speaking to directly, is not Danny Rand the Iron Fist, and yet that is how it's framed in the narration. It's very kind of in your face, and it does something as a reader that just a lot of these other tenses don't do. And honestly, I thought it worked so effectively throughout all of this. It lent a very interesting sense of uniqueness and variety to an otherwise kind of just, Bronze Age collection here. Really like that, and that's something you see carry over throughout this entire run in this book, to the point where it kind of fell into the background for me by the end, but it is really such a striking device, and I loved it. So anyway, the first couple issues really go into him kind of trying to find his way through New York, back in the real world, and really kind of fish out of water after being raised in this kind of otherworldly realm for most of his life at this point. And so it's interesting to see him kind of make his way up, trying to confront his father's killer. Ultimately, there is a twist there. He finds out that his father's killer has been, maybe not his best the last 10 years either. And right before he's able to, commit his own sense of revenge, his father's killer is murdered by a ninja, and then he's framed for the murder. The daughter walks in and accuses Iron Fist of killing her father, and that spins out into this whole next story arc where he's kind of a wanted man, has to kind of clear his name. Anyway, we have Danny Rand also just at this crossroads of like, okay, now that his vengeance has been enacted, even if it wasn't by his hand, what does he do now? He was so singular focused in his training to try to make his own sense of justice for what happened to his parents, but now that his father's killer is no more, what does he do with his life? Well, most immediately he has to kind of vindicate himself, clear his name, and that kind of spins out into the next few story arcs. We find Professor Wing, or Dr. Wing, who kind of stumbles across things that he knows about the Iron Fist. His daughter, Colleen Wing, becomes a very prominent character in the Iron Fist and Marvel mythos, and she's introduced in this early part of this run. But there basically comes to a point where after he finishes those first kind of missions, between trying to find his father's killer, then trying to clear his name, and then try to help out the Wings, things kind of settle a bit, and he's trying to decide, well, basically, Kunlun is not supposed to be here for a while longer, and he's now just in New York, but he might know who the Iron Fist is, but who is Danny Rand? What is his life anymore? He finds out eventually that he's inherited a bunch of money because he has the controlling stake in this company. But again, he's trying to find his place. Is he going to eventually go back to Kunlun because that feels like his home now? Does he have a mission here in Earth, in New York? Is he supposed to be kind of a hero or vigilante here? And I really love that kind of sense of exploration and identity. That was something about this title I really didn't expect either. Granted, I'm still making my way through a lot of Bronze Age material. Like I said, I read that Luke Cage book. I read the Warlock, the Adam Warlock Omnibus recently. That's kind of a Bronze Age Marvel book. But again, I'm still dabbling traveling in this era, and I find it to be much more modern and sophisticated in many ways than I would have expected. This is, maybe late 70s mostly in this omnibus, mid to late 70s. But again, there's a lot of really kind of great stuff happening in this book. I think it's all extremely well written. We got a lot of Chris Claremont here, who's a favorite of mine, obviously, with the Uncanny X-Men and things like that. Some incredible art throughout as well. Again, a lot of John Byrne, who's himself a wonderful writer and artist. But really, really good stuff. There are a couple other different story arcs. We have some more episodic, kind of one-issue wonders, and we do have a lot of, again, kind of multi-issue story arcs. They introduce the character of Misty Knight as well into the Iron Fist world as a potential love interest. There's a whole batch of issues where Colleen Wing gets basically kidnapped, and Iron Fist and Misty try to find her. Iron Fist and Colleen have to do a kind of mind meld soul connection thing for her to be saved at one point, giving them a really interesting dynamic, which is fun. We have kind of a romance blooming between Misty and Iron Fist at one point. So overall, there's a ton going on. We also have a son of Kunlun who's always been jealous of Danny, kind of try to strike against him as a villain. We have Meacham's daughter, Joy, kind of teaming up with her uncle Ward to try to stop the Iron Fist, again, kind of blaming him for her father's death. So all of these subplots are also kind of percolating and going on in the background of this omnibus, and it's a ton of fun. Something else about this book, though, I want to mention, and you've probably seen it, there are portions in black and white, and you might be thinking, what is that about? You have some beautiful color reproduced, and then you have these black and white issues. What's going on? Well, these are the materials from The Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, for the most part. That was a series that was done in black and white that didn't really have to adhere to the Comics Code Authority. So because of that, the portions in black and white are often more kind of grisly, grimdark, violent, and towards the end of this book, they're also graphic. There is some nudity. I will say it's not maybe overly sexualized, but there is some topless female nudity and some scenes of kind of drugged violence and abuse. I didn't really like that. I try to avoid scenes of nudity in comic books, and that was honestly a really unfortunate surprise for me because I just didn't expect it in a book from the 70s. But I want to let collectors out there know, if you're kind of sensitive to materials like that, like myself, this might be one to avoid or kind of cherry pick around. I didn't, again, enjoy that too much. Some of the Deadly Hands of Kung Fu stuff was fun, though. There's appearances by Shang-Chi for fans of that franchise. Some of the other kind of Kung Fu Marvel world, I will say. So it was really fun. You get to see a lot of Iron Fist appearances throughout that. Toward the end of the book, and this is the stuff that had some of that graphic material I mentioned, there's a couple issues that just really follow Colleen Wing and Misty Knight as they travel and try to fight for justice. So that material is interwoven throughout this book, presumably in chronological order. I will say that does break the sense of momentum a bit with the Iron Fist stories, because you'll have, like, next time on Iron Fist, this is going to happen. But then you'll have an issue, or sometimes 5 of Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, then you go back to where the story was continuing or going next. This didn't necessarily ruin this book for me in the reading experience, but I honestly think I could have gotten away with just the colored Iron Fist and Marvel Premiere issues. But I guess for completionists out there, it is nice to have more Iron Fist material. I will say his adaptations in those Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, again, feel a little more layered, complex, and in many cases darker, more violent. The art style is also a little more realistic, I will say. The kind of ethereal voice as well, again, feels a little more mature. You can tell the audience is supposed to be a little bit more older and stuff like that compared to just the straight up Iron Fist issues. So that, again, is interwoven throughout this omnibus, and that is a note I definitely wanted to make for all of you prospective collectors out there. There are more story arcs than what I've mentioned in this brief overview, but I've given you kind of a good idea of some of the most shining examples of the better story arcs or the bigger plot bits that you'd get in this book. But overall, I think that my takeaway is that Iron Fist is a surprisingly wonderful character, and for premiering in this Bronze Age, I think that this is a really extraordinary run. Between the second-person narration and just kind of the complexities of this character. I just think it's done so unbelievably well. And having the team of Claremont and Byrne is just a really, really dynamic duo. Again, I'm a huge fan of these creators from the Uncanny X-Men, and to see them, right around this period as well, doing another title. This might, I believe, even predate their stuff on Uncanny X-Men. Don't quote me on that, but it's, it's right around in the soup. But I loved seeing another book like this. I love seeing the care they gave to this character, the dimensionality. And like I said, we have more creators than just them, of course, on Iron Fist, but they definitely scream to mind. There's a bulk of this book that's by them. But I just really love it. We have some great fight sequences as well. Again, this is predominantly a martial arts based superhero. And so because of that, we get a lot of great action sequences. I think that that's really well realized. And even before an era where we have a lot of panel experimentation, I still think that there's a kind of frenetic, kinetic sense of motion and urgency in a lot of these books that just really worked for me. It really, really was easy to follow the pacing and the momentum of the story. Again, other than when we splashed over to Deadly Hands of Kung Fu again, that transition can be a bit jarring. But other than that, I think within the issues themselves, really, really good sense of vision and where they're going, a lot of good payoffs. I do think also the supporting cast of characters is surprisingly well developed. I think the Wings and Misty Knight were all utilized very well. And there were moments where we get Iron Fist's place in the broader Marvel universe. Like there's this great issue where he fights Iron Man, Tony Stark, of course. So it's Iron Fist versus Iron Man, the Iron issue, of course, we always needed to see. It was a misunderstanding that went too far. We have another issue where he fights Captain America. Again, another kind of misunderstanding. We have an issue where he sort of teams up with Spider-Man. The last issue of Iron Fist, I believe issue 15, is him battling most of the X-Men. I think that this was also a very fun issue, especially because we have Claremont. I just really, really loved it. It is a funny wrap-up to the traditional Iron Fist run, but it was so fun seeing the X-Men. Again, during this era, we have Iron Fist battling Wolverine and Storm and Nightcrawler and Colossus and all of these favorites. So it's really fun to also see where he fits in the Marvel Universe. But this is really a Danny story and him trying to find himself and who he is. And it just works for me. Like I said, I think it's surprisingly nuanced for the era this came out in. And I just really give it 2 thumbs up as far as the original Iron Fist content. I don't think that the Deadly Hands of Kung Fu were really up my alley. I don't know that I'm the audience for that series. I know that has its own omnibus or 2 or more. It was fun seeing characters like Shang-Chi and some of these other Marvel martial artists. But overall, again, I preferred the issues we got in color between Marvel Premiere, some of the crossover stuff, and the Iron Fist run proper. At the back of the book, as you saw, we have some great kind of promotional materials, behind-the-scenes sketches, or kind of outlines, things like that. A really good selection of extras, honestly, for a Bronze Age book. Really happy to see all of that. And that is Iron Fist, Danny Rand, The Early Years Omnibus. Really fun book, like I said, and now all that's left is to give it a grade. For a wonderfully effective martial arts classic from the Bronze Age, the Comic Book Report is happy to give Iron Fist, Danny Rand, The Early Years Omnibus from Marvel Comics a B+. This was a well above average collection for me, and even though the explicit nature of some of the Deadly Hands of Kung Fu's issues weren't quite up my alley, I think everything else more than made up for it in many ways. Danny Rand is a really layered and complex character that I think was utilized so effectively in this premiere volume. Absolutely love the characters, the sense of action, the creators on it, everything was just really, really well done. This by far exceeded my expectations and makes me eager to read even more Iron Fist in the future. But let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if you have any great Iron Fist recommendations. I mentioned I am reading the Brubaker Fraction run right now. Anything beyond that too, would love to hear about it in the comments. And until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to give this video a like, that comment we talked about, and maybe check out another video on your way out. Thanks and have a good one.